Remove this food from your home now. It could increase your cancer risk in 30 days. That headline is meant to grab you, and I'll be blunt. I want you to feel the urgency. But I also need you to hear the science with clear eyes. What the recent large studies show are associations, patterns across tens of thousands of people followed for years, not a proven one-way cause that guarantees cancer in a month. Think of the 30 days in the title as a behavioral nudge. Start removing certain items from your kitchen now. Some metabolic or inflammatory changes can be detectable within weeks for some people, but cancer develops over years. The evidence points to chronic, low-dose exposure to certain food preservatives as a concerning part of that long view. Picture this. It's after school, you reach into the fridge and you grab what looks like a healthy snack, a slice of 100% whole grain bread and a package of turkey breast. You pack it for a child or for yourself, thinking this is a careful, modern choice. The package looks trustworthy. The label brags preservative-free in big letters, except one of the preservatives is listed under a different name, or hidden in the ingredient code you ignore. That ordinary scene is where this problem begins. Here's the graph that kept me up at night. JAMA and other papers have documented a troubling rise in colorectal cancer among adults under 50 over the past 2 decades, even as lung cancer deaths have declined thanks to less smoking. The population shifts tell us something important. Traditional explanations like age and tobacco do not fully account for this trend. Diet, obesity, and environmental exposures have become prominent suspects. And within diet, the role of ultra-processed foods and the additives that keep them shelf-stable is receiving new scrutiny. Over the last few years, large observational cohorts, most notably Nutrinet Santé, a European project encompassing over 100,000 participants followed for up to 14 years, published analyses in high-quality journals such as the BMJ and Nature Communications. These studies examined a wide range of food additives and preservative chemicals and tracked health outcomes including type 2 diabetes and several types of cancer. They found meaningful associations. For example, higher intake of certain preservatives was associated with roughly a 47% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes in some analyses. Other chemicals were linked to higher rates of breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer in adjusted models. These are headline numbers you should not ignore. But remember, they are relative associations observed across populations, not guarantees for any individual person. If you're with me so far, and this matters to you, hit like and share this video with one person who buys packaged lunch meat for their kids. That's the one simple action that spreads awareness. So what are the likely culprits? From the kitchen perspective, 3 preservative groups stand out because they are common in everyday packaged foods and were repeatedly highlighted in these cohort analyses. I'll walk through them, what they do biologically in broad terms, and exactly where you'll find them so you can start swapping things out. Number 3. Calcium propionate, listed as E282. This one is extremely common in sliced packaged breads, many commercial baked goods, and even some crackers. Bakers often add it because it prevents mold and extends shelf life. The concern raised by the Nutrinet analyses and other research is that calcium propionate can influence the gut ecosystem and metabolic regulation. In plain language, chemicals that change which bacteria thrive in your gut can shift how we process sugar and fat, and a disrupted microbiome can promote low-grade inflammation. Imagine the gut as a garden. If certain weeds take over because of a pesticide, the rest of the garden suffers. That's a simple way to think about how a preservative can have downstream effects. Number 2. Potassium sorbate and acetate salts, listed as E202 and as E260, E262, for acetic acid acetates. These preservatives appear across a surprising range of refrigerated and packaged foods, flavored yogurts, some refrigerated sauces, processed cheeses, shelf-stable dips, and many convenience items labeled "No refrigeration required." In the cohorts, higher dietary exposure to sorbates and related acetates was associated with modestly higher overall cancer incidence and specific increases in breast cancer risk. One analysis reported an association on the order of a 14% higher overall cancer risk and a 26% higher risk for breast cancer in the highest exposure groups. Mechanistically, sorbates and similar preservatives can contribute to oxidative stress and may alter inflammatory signaling. You can visualize oxidative stress like rust slowly forming on a metal surface. Over time, tissues can be damaged by that chemical wear. That doesn't mean sorbates are the single cause of cancer, but it's a plausible contributor when exposure is constant and cumulative. And the number 1 household villain, sodium nitrite and nitrate, E250 and E251. These are the ones used in processed meats, bacon, ham, hot dogs, many lunch meats, primarily to preserve color and prevent bacterial growth. We have stronger historical evidence around nitrites because they can form nitrosamines in the acidic environment of the stomach. Nitrosamines are chemical compounds with well-documented carcinogenic activity in animal models, and epidemiology has long linked processed meat consumption with colorectal cancer. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, classifies processed meat as Group 1, meaning there is sufficient evidence that processed meat is associated with colorectal cancer in humans. The WHO has estimated that an additional 50 grams per day of processed meat, about 2 slices of bacon, is associated with an 18% higher relative risk of colorectal cancer. Other recent cohort analyses found nitrite exposure associated with higher prostate cancer risk in some models. For example, an association of about a 32% higher risk in certain subgroups. Again, these are relative increases observed at the population level. An individual's absolute risk depends on baseline risk, genetics, lifestyle, and other exposures. Let's be clear about the limits of these findings. These are observational cohort studies. Observational studies are powerful for finding signals that warrant concern and further study, but they cannot fully exclude confounding other factors that co-occur with preservative intake, like overall dietary pattern, body weight, smoking status, or socioeconomic variables, can influence results. Researchers try to adjust for known confounders, but residual confounding remains possible. The bottom line, the weight of evidence is suggestive and consistent enough to justify precautionary action, not panic. Why might these preservatives be biologically active in ways that increase long-term risk? There are a few plausible mechanisms that tie together microbiome science, inflammation, and chemical transformation in the body. First, nitrosamine formation. Nitrites and nitrates, especially when combined with certain dietary amines under acidic stomach conditions, can form nitrosamines. Those compounds have potent mutagenic effects in laboratory models and are suspected contributors to colorectal carcinogenesis. Second, microbiome disruption. Many preservatives possess antimicrobial properties. That's literally their job, to prevent microbial growth in food. When we consume low doses daily, these agents may alter the balance of bacteria in the gut. A healthy microbiome participates in immune regulation, metabolism, and maintaining the integrity of the intestinal barrier. Disruption can increase intestinal permeability, systemic inflammation, and metabolic dysregulation, all pathways linked to cancer promotion. Third, inflammation and oxidative stress. Some preservatives or their metabolites can encourage low-grade inflammatory signaling and oxidative damage. Chronic inflammation creates an environment in which DNA damage and abnormal cellular growth are more likely to occur over years. Fourth, metabolic effects. There is an interplay between preservatives, the microbiome, and host metabolism. Studies linking higher preservative intake to a greater risk of type 2 diabetes suggest that chronic exposure could worsen insulin resistance and other metabolic processes that are themselves risk factors for certain cancers. Again, these are plausible mechanisms supported by laboratory and translational data, and they line up with the epidemiologic associations. None of these lines alone proves causation. They form a coherent hypothesis that is biologically credible and epidemiologically consistent. So what do you do if you want to reduce your exposure without turning your kitchen upside down or falling into restrictive extremes? The practical answer is a stepwise kitchen cleanup and replacement plan that is realistic for busy people and families. You do not have to be perfect. You need direction. Here's a 5-step realistic approach you can start this week. First, start with bread. Replace packaged sliced bread that lists calcium propionate, E2A2, on the label with fresh bakery sourdough, whole loaves from a local bakery, or homemade bread. Fresh bread spoils faster, but that's part of the point. Real food has a shorter shelf life. If you need longer-lasting options, freeze single slices and toast them directly from the freezer, rather than buying factory-preserved loaves. Second, rethink deli meats and processed proteins. Replace packaged lunch meats with home-cooked shredded chicken. Make a batch on Sunday and portion it. Canned tuna in water with minimal additives. Roasted turkey from the counter, without added preservatives. Hard-boiled eggs, or plant-based protein options like hummus and sliced roasted vegetables. If you do buy cured meats occasionally, use them sparingly as an accent, not as a daily staple. Third, Swap flavored and shelf-stable dairy products for plain options. Many flavored yogurts and processed dairy snacks contain potassium sorbate, E202, and acetate preservatives, E262, E262. Choose plain yogurt or kefir and add fresh fruit, a drizzle of honey, or a sprinkle of nuts. For cheese, opt for fresh mozzarella or cheeses from refrigerated counters that list minimal ingredients. Fourth, replace highly processed snacks and fit bars with whole food alternatives. Bars, many packaged baked goods, and ready-to-eat snack packs can carry acetates and propionates. Nuts, seeds, fresh fruit, sliced vegetables, and homemade trail mix preserve convenience without the same additive burden. Fifth, learn to read labels and look for the E-codes. Familiarize yourself with E250, E251, sodium nitrite, nitrate, E282, calcium propionate, E2azotue, potassium sorbate, E262, E262, acetates, and E224, metabisulfite. If you see them high on the ingredients list, that product is a candidate for replacement. Make this a weekly kitchen project rather than an overnight overhaul. Pick one staple to replace each week. Week 1, replace the sliced bread. Week 2, swap deli meats. Week 3, change yogurts and cheeses. Week 4, audit snacks and bars. By 1 month, you can substantially reduce your household exposure without stress. This timeline ties back to the 30 days in the title as a behavioral target. It's realistic to make meaningful swaps in 30 days, even though the reduction in cancer risk, if any, unfolds over a longer period. Here are a few practical cook-smart tips that save time. Roast a whole chicken on the weekend, shred it, and portion into containers for sandwiches, salads, and quick dinners. Make a big tub of plain yogurt with fruit jars so the kids can grab them easily. Learn a simple sourdough or no-knead bread recipe. It's easier than it looks and far tastier than factory-sliced loaves. Keep a jar of mixed nuts and dried fruit in the pantry to replace packaged bars. These small habits preserve convenience while shifting your family away from additives. You may wonder about trade-offs: cost, time, and taste. Yes, fresh and minimally processed foods can cost more or take extra time, but you don't need an all-or-nothing approach. Buy less ultra-processed food and reallocate a modest portion of your grocery budget toward fresh staples. Use freezing strategically to avoid waste. And remind yourself, real food spoils. That's a feature, not a bug. Shorter shelf life usually means fewer industrial preservatives. Let me address how to think about risk numbers so you don't misinterpret headlines. When a study reports a 14% higher relative risk of cancer associated with a preservative, that's a relative figure. If your baseline absolute risk is low, for example, 2 in a 1,000, a 14% relative increase raises it to roughly 2.28 in 1,000. The relative increase sounds bigger than the absolute change for many individuals, which is why understanding baseline risk matters. Public health looks at relative increases because they affect populations. A modest relative increase across millions of people translates into many additional cases. For an individual, the meaningful approach is to reduce modifiable exposures where feasible, especially when substitutes are accessible and low risk. Also, if you're thinking, isn't this just another anti-processed food rant? Recall that industrial food systems introduced many additives to solve real problems: food safety, waste, and microbial contamination. But every chemical added to preserve shelf life may have unintended long-term effects. The modern challenge is balancing food safety and shelf stability with long-term health. That's why public health research looks for signals, and why regulatory agencies and scientific communities place value on careful, repeated study. You might also hear about celebrity cases. And yes, public figures sometimes make the headlines when they face health struggles. I'll mention names only as illustrations of public interest, not evidence. When a public figure is diagnosed with cancer, it often draws attention to lifestyle and environmental factors. But celebrity stories do not prove cause and effect. They motivate conversation. The science must be the anchor. Before I close, a short practical kitchen checklist you can use today. Scan your bread package for E282. Check deli meats and bacon for E250, E251. Avoid flavored refrigerated yogurts with long additive lists. Swap packaged snack bars for nuts and fruit. And make one batch cook protein each week so you're less tempted by packaged convenience. If you're overwhelmed, pick one change and stick to it for a month. Changing one staple reduces your exposure and builds sustainable habits. A few final scientific notes and one legal-sounding but necessary reassurance. The studies cited here include large cohort analyses reported in the BMJ and Nature Communications from the Nutrinet Santé cohort, and the epidemiologic trend in early-onset colorectal cancer has been highlighted in JAMA. The IARC WHO classification of processed meat as Group 1 reflects the strength of evidence linking processed meat and colorectal cancer, while not characterizing the precise magnitude of risk for every individual. This video summarizes observational research and does not replace personalized medical advice. Consult your physician for individual recommendations. You don't need perfection, you need direction. Reducing chronic exposure to specific preservatives is a pragmatic step rooted in emerging science. Practical swaps, label literacy, and gradual kitchen cleanups are powerful ways to act without fear. In weeks, you may notice small changes: less bloating, better energy, or simply more control over what you eat. Over years, cutting unnecessary continuous exposures is one component of a broader cancer risk reduction strategy that includes maintaining a healthy weight, staying active, and keeping up with recommended screenings. If this video changed the way you look at what's in your pantry, please share it with one person who buys packaged lunch meat for their family, and leave a comment telling me which preservative on the E-code list surprised you most. If you want a deeper dive, I've linked 2 videos next. One that reviews signs and symptoms to watch for in colorectal cancer, and one that walks step by step through a full kitchen audit to identify hidden additives. I'm a physician who reads the data so you can act on it. Start this week. Open your fridge, read the label, and make one swap. Small, sustained choices add up.